Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event for Aviva versus the Dybbuk. I consulted my Jewish friend to make sure I was saying that right. We are here with Mari Lowe, or is it Mari or Mary?
Mari.
Mari. We are here with Mari Lowe and Leah Horowitz. We are so excited to share this book with you. I'm Laura. I'm the events coordinator here at the Astoria Bookshop, which is the bookshop hosting this event. If you don't know who we are because you found us through the internet, or perhaps you are Mari's grandmother, we are a bookshop in Astoria, Queens. Before we get started, I wanted to go through a few housekeeping things. You will have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the whole stream. I will pop back in during the last 10 to 15 minutes to read them and have them answered for you, but you can always click Ask a Question on the bottom and put your little question in. If there's a question that you want answered that someone else asked, there is a voting button and you can just upvote it. Other than that, please be respectful. Don't say anything you wouldn't want your mother or your boss to see. That is the rule I stick by. And I will put a link shortly, a little button to buy the book, because I forgot to do that, and that is my fault. I'm sorry. But other than that, let's get started and introduce our guests. Mari Lowe has too little free time and spends it all on writing and escape rooms. As the daughter of a rabbi and as a middle school teacher at an Orthodox Jewish school, she looks forward to sharing little glimpses into her community with her books. She lives in New York with her family, menagerie of pets, and robotic vacuum. Wonderful. Leah Horowitz's career has taken her from the recording studio, where she sang commercial jingles as a child, to Broadway and concert stages. She has appeared in 7 musicals on Broadway, including Les Mis and Follies, and is a frequent singer for New York City Ballet. I Want to Be Your Friend. And now back to the studio, where she has been narrating audiobooks since 2019. Leah received AudioFile Magazine's Earphones Award for her work on Just Like That by Gary D. Schmidt and The Morning Star by Carl Ove Nosgard. Oh, I hope I said that right. Originally from Staten Island, she holds a BFA from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and now lives in New Jersey with her husband, daughter, and cute but needy dog. And you can find out more at leahhorowitz.com. All right, and with that, one more thing I almost forgot. At the end of the stream, when I pop in to answer the Q&As, I will announce the winner of the Libro FM giveaway, who will get 3 free months of a Libro FM membership. And perhaps there's a certain book you might want to listen to on there. I don't know. Figure it out. But with that, I will leave you guys to it, and I will be back around 7:45.
Hi, Mari.
Hi. I'm sorry. I think my computer might be acting up. Oh, there you are. Okay. All right.
Do you want to start off by giving like a quick summary of the book for people who might not have read it?
Yeah, definitely. So the story is Aviva versus the Dybbuk. The idea is it's set in an Orthodox Jewish community. And it's about this girl, Aviva, who lives with her mother over a mikveh, which is a kind of like ritual bathhouse. And her mother runs the mikveh, and they live in an apartment there. And her mother, unfortunately, she lost her father years before. So her mother is kind of since then sunk into a very deep depression, has trouble leaving the house, and so on. And Aviva, meanwhile, she's their link with the outside world, but she's also kind of processing her own grief. And at the same time, there's this Dybbuk that's just kind of haunting the bathhouse and creating all kinds of mischief. And over time, we begin to understand kind of why the Dybbuk's there, what the Dybbuk's doing, what Aviva's doing, and kind of on that pathway to healing.
I loved this book. So before I narrate a book, I have to read it first. And sometimes the books I have to read, I'm kind of just reading it, writing down the words that I need to find out how to pronounce. But this book, I just tore through. I was at my family's for Christmas and they were all like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm reading this book for work. It's so good," and I just couldn't stop reading it. So I was so excited to work on it. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that it was written, read during Christmas. I feel like that's kind of like a melding it. But no, I'm just so like grateful really that it's out there, because I know this wasn't really an easy kind of thing. There really aren't a lot of books like it out there, and I didn't even know if there would be a chance, but I'm just really excited about that. Okay.
You want to talk more about that? Like, I know that you said that one of the reasons you wanted to write this book was because of the lack of modern representations of this community.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also wondering, that was like one of my questions for you, was there a particular thing that inspired this story? Like, I know that's a question that a lot of authors get. It's kind of like the cheesy question to ask, but I'm just genuinely curious if this came from anywhere, any place in your life, anybody you know, or if it was just pure imagination.
So it's interesting. I spend a lot of time with students who unfortunately deal with that kind of grief that Aviva has, and also at a very, very young age. And so that was, part of just the backstory for this. But like a lot of it was, I was kind of experimenting with the concept of magical realism, which is a genre where it's, realistic contemporary fiction, but at the same time, there's some sort of, little bit of something supernatural within it. So I'm like very properly terrified of a lot of Jewish mythology, because it's always like very insidious. It's like, oh yeah, we can talk about these demons, but don't talk about them after sunset. And somehow that makes it feel like a little more real, very validating. And I'm always fascinated by anything that terrifies me. Like we talked about that on the phone. So conceptually, the Dybbuk started as like a much lighter character, really Aviva's only friend in this world where she isn't swallowed up by grief. But the grief in the Dybbuk really became like inextricable. You can't talk about this ghostly creature without also talking about grief and death and so on. And for me, like I really wanted to write something. I mean, I guess I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I wanted to write something that was about my community without the story being the community. I felt that there's really very little out there that isn't a story about someone joining the community or leaving the community. And like, there's no just stories of kids existing within the culture. And I felt very much like that was something that was important. That was something that was really neglected. And I was so frustrated by it. I was like, I should just sit down and write it myself. So I did. I mean, my father is a rabbi, and his work has always also had a huge, huge impact on me. He navigates a lot of really sad, really complicated interpersonal issues, especially things like loss and depression. But it's really interesting because he works with so many people who just want to help people. So many people who want to, quietly do it. Like he tells me about these, like, people who will just fund someone else for a year, give them what they need. I had a friend in high school, I remember, who she, unfortunately, she and her mother were struggling, and he just like had an anonymous person, or they arranged for her to get gift cards to a supermarket. And it just quietly happened for years. Things like that. They've had like people just funding summer camps for little girls who want to go to summer camp. And that's really, that's not a necessity. That's not something they need to be doing, but it's something that just makes them kind of feel just more included, more, like everyone else. And I felt like that strength of the community was something really beautiful that we don't really get to see so much, so much of that acknowledged in the media. We're like too busy being caricatured. So that was really, for me, something I really wanted to show. I just wanted that, kind of within the culture without it being about the culture, and also just that strength of community.
Well, and that's really comes through in the book. There is this sense that there's this whole community really of women who are there to help Aviva and her mother, but they have to be willing to take the help too,
Right. There's a lot of kind of hovering in the outskirts, and, they gave her this job in the first place, the mother. They found something where she would have very little to do, and they could probably pay her very well for it. And, that can be something to, exist with. But I think that was like really important for me in terms of just how to portray it.
Was it also on your mind, because it does kind of thread into the story, just the the climate that we're living in today, with like the rise of anti-Semitism, and like that had to have been on your mind too when you were writing it.
It was funny because I didn't want it to be a story about anti-Semitism. I felt that, very often the stories that we hear are about Jews as victims, about Jews being targeted very much. And then it kind of, obviously it makes its way into the story, slowly but surely, until it becomes at that, climactic moment. But originally I really was hoping to write something, totally void of it, but I didn't think it was possible in the end. I felt that it was, something very necessary that really has to be at the core there. Regardless of whether or not, I really like the idea that this is where we are, this is when we come up in the news, when anti-Semitism happens.
Yeah. Well, it grounds it in reality, where you've got the magical realism, but you're so grounded in reality. So they work off each other really well, I think.
Yeah, very much. I have to ask, we didn't talk this over beforehand. Are we swapping off? Because I have questions for you too, or should we, do a bunch? Because I'm very, very curious about how this whole process works of creating an audiobook. I think it's something that people really just don't know anything about. So, how do you pick voice? How do you pick pacing? How do you decide how you're going to dictate different parts? How do you choose the voice for Aviva?
I think a lot of that depends on the book, honestly. Sometimes I have to read the book beforehand, because every publisher does things a little differently, but the publisher that I mainly work for, Recorded Books, they have a research department. So I obviously read the book, to get the story and everything, because you don't want to be reading it in the studio and be totally surprised, what's, but what I'm also doing is I keep track of all the characters and write all the characters down, so I have a list of them. And then I also write down any words that I need pronunciations for. So that can be mostly any character name that's not like John or Robert, just to make sure it's the right pronunciation. Place names, anything in another language. So obviously this book had a lot of words that, I'm half Jewish and my daughter went to a Jewish preschool, but you still don't know. And it turned out a lot of the words were pronounced a little differently in the Orthodox community than they were when I had heard them. So it was good that I wrote them down. And so once I do that, once I finish the book, I send my list off to the research department, and they know the date that I'm going to record, and they send it back, and it's all written out in IPA, which is like a phonetic alphabet, which I learned a little bit in acting school, but there's like a key, so it helps me just know how to phonetically pronounce everything. And so when I get to a sentence that has the word in it, I can refer back to the list, and I can stop and make sure that I pronounce it correctly. And when I'm recording, obviously I have to stop and start. I'll have to stop to take a drink of water. I will stop if I stumble. And what I'll do is when I stop, I just go back to before the mistake, and I do what's called a punch in, and I punch in and I keep going. But sorry, I got off topic. In terms of the characters, some books I will sit with my list and I'll think about each character, and I'll think about, maybe a person that in my life that would maybe be that character, and kind of think of how they talk. Or I'll think of actors. Sometimes I'll cast the book. But some books, like this book, I don't know. I just read it and I was like, I think I know what this is. And I just kind of started reading it and had faith that they would kind of come to me as I got to them. And you just want to make sure that your main characters are nice and differentiated, because they'll be speaking a lot and you don't want to get the listener to get confused. And the minor characters, I will just, when I get to them, just, something will come to me, It really does depend on the book. Some books will have like a historic figure, where like one book I did had I think Teddy Roosevelt, and I had to go listen to a recording, to make sure that I could kind of get like what he sounded like. But
I
You
have
know,
to hear the
obviously
Teddy Roosevelt now, I think.
now I don't even remember. I'd have to go back and listen to it. You know, or some characters will have an accent that I don't know off the top of my head. So I'll go on YouTube, I'll listen to like, you know, I've had to do like a Polish accent, and I won't be able to do an exact, you know, you just want a hint of it. You don't want to be, you know, indecipherable, but it's kind of a process, you know, and the book, if the book is about 5 hours long, it probably took me at least 10 hours to record because of all the
Oh, wow.
stopping and yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
gosh.
figure when I go into the booth, I have an hour, I know I can probably get about a half an hour down, you know.
Wow. That's amazing. Wait, so
Yeah.
you mentioned on the phone with me once your booth is basically a closet. So
It is a standard size closet up in our guest room early on in the pandemic when it became apparent that this was going to last a while. I decided to kind of take the plunge and buy some equipment, and my husband and I kind of ripped out a shelf in the closet and put up soundproofing and just stuck a little desk in there, and I go in there and shut the door, and yeah, there's no air, so I have to open the door every once in a while and kind of, you know. But the nice thing is I'm home, and you know, we talked about it's the convenience of working from home, you know. You can jump in whenever you need to and jump out again and get your work done. So pluses and minuses.
very much, yes. And probably the best part is when you're done, there's no commute. It's just a
Yes.
that was, I think, the only thing I liked about teaching on Zoom. The rest of it was terrible. But, you know, that moment you could just go home.
We talked about that. I still can't believe. So you have 4 children and you're a teacher.
Yes.
And a book.
Yes.
And were you writing this book during the pandemic, or had you finished it?
I had already finished it. I wrote it like randomly. It was my husband is a saint, because I remember I was like, I had gotten the idea. I came home. I said, I'm going to work on this. And then I wrote every morning before school. And then I started to write in the evenings too. And like at the time I had 3 kids, but I still had a lot of kids. And he was watching them. I said, I need to finish this. I need to write 2 chapters today. It was, I think it was 12 days in all of just like madcap writing, and probably a lot more than that of editing. But, and he was like, okay, I'll take the kids. There's an end in sight, you know, this is going quickly. But, you know, there was a lot of them kind of outside my door. Mommy, like my son was about a minute ago going, I need a drink of water. I'm sure it's very, very urgent. But, you know, everything I could, it was like Aviva had possessed me like a Dybbuk.
Well, that's amazing. So you really like wrote it that quickly. And then you just had to go through all of the editing phases and everything.
There's a lot of editing.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was just, you know what? I'd written a lot in the past. I'd never written a book like within my culture before. I had never even tried. And once I got past the first, you know, chapter or 2, it was so easy. I've never had such an easy time writing something, because it felt so natural and felt so simple, and was like genuinely drawing on my own life experiences, which is honestly something I never experienced before in writing, you know, which was really, really cool for me. So it was very quick.
Do you find that any of the characters are like kind of people from your life? I mean, you don't have to say who, but like, were you using people from your life in your mind?
So there's definitely, so it's actually funny because I'm a history teacher, but the history teacher was absolutely based on this math teacher in my school, who is the kindest, like most giving person, you know, very matter of fact, very sensible, but she's, you know, a little older than me, but I won't tell her I said so. And, but there's, you know, just that feeling of kind of like a grandmotherliness to her that I just really wanted to convey. So she was very much the inspiration for that. Aviva herself, I think I thought of a few actually students, not anyone specific, just in like certain mannerisms, and like how she plays ball and how she can't sit still. There were like certain little aspects that I was definitely pulling from the classroom. I don't know if it was a specific student or just studenthood as a whole, because 6th graders are all kind of the same in that sense.
So do you ever tell students to go take a walk?
Very often. Sometimes I tell them to go down the hall and do jumping jacks because I think that that works best. I had one student who had to take a walk before class every single day, and it still wasn't enough for her. I remember she once told me, like randomly in class out of nowhere, she says, "You should know I don't have ADHD. My brother and my sister do, but I don't." I said, "Okay, sure." All right, we'll go with that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I thought that all the school scenes were really, I mean, interesting. We talked about this too, that like the book is so specific about your culture and your community, but still so relatable. It's almost like the more specific it is, the more relatable it becomes. That like, and that leads into my question about, did you set out to write for this age group? Like, because you teach them, like, were you thinking I'm going to write a middle grade book for these kids? Or did it kind of like turn into that as you were writing?
So I definitely started with the thought that I was going to write a middle grade book because I guess the age group, you know, when I figured out how old Aviva was going to be, it seemed like it would be that. And a little bit, I felt like I had an in with that middle grade age because I'm in middle school forever. I'm never leaving. I always said I'd never repeat 6th grade, and now I repeat it every single year, and I love it. But it's really not my genre. Like, I've never tried middle grade before this, but I felt like this was an age group I really wanted to target because there's so much flexibility and mindset there. Like, they do see things very much in black and white, but they're also not introduced to a lot of things yet. So once you hit a certain age and you kind of see a certain number of Orthodox Jewish like caricatures in the media, it's really hard to unlearn these certain, you know, assumptions and presumptions you have about that. So I was really kind of hoping that this would be the first encounter that a lot of children would have with an Orthodox Jew, that Aviva would be their first Jew, or at least their first Orthodox Jew. And, you know, hopefully the book will make it into lots of schools and make that happen. I definitely like, I know. Okay, wait, go on. Sorry.
No, I was just agreeing.
Wait, no, I couldn't hear. Hang on. My service just suddenly blinked out. Did you just say something? I couldn't hear. No?
I was just agreeing.
What? Oh, okay. But yeah, I wasn't like necessarily targeting certain goals or lessons or, you know, some kind of theme. There were definitely some themes I wanted to share, like there was strength of a community, of course, and obviously this is a book that goes hand in hand with grief and mental health, but I don't think they were really the target. I was really focused on writing a book that middle graders would enjoy and that would introduce them to my culture without being the culture. Like, I think I discussed this on the phone a little bit, but I've written
Okay, you are frozen for me. Hopefully not for everybody else. I'm going to give it a minute and then I might ask Laura to help here. Laura, are you here?
Never met before. So I guess that was really my main goal.
Okay, you were just frozen for me for a long time, but I hope that everybody else could hear what you were saying.
I don't know, because you were just frozen for me also. One of us has really bad internet right now. It might be me. I don't know.
You're very blurry. Am I blurry to you?
Yes, you are blurry to me. Oh, here we go. I was frozen. Okay. So I don't even know where I stopped. So, But, okay. All right. Well, I was very frozen. It's all me.
You were talking about how you didn't set out to write like specific themes. You wanted to write a book that middle grade readers would enjoy. I think that's about where I lost you.
So really just the one thing I think that I added on, we discussed this on the phone also, but I kept thinking about fantasy writing and how you have books full of, you know, dragons and unicorns and kingdoms and 15 different kingdoms with different talents and everyone has a different name and a different new term and kids learn all that. If it's, you know, if they're interested in the book and they want to learn it, they can learn all about that world. So why not my community, which is maybe even a little bit closer to them? And that was really like my main goal, was kind of just treating this like this is just another setting. And it's just one that, you know, you've never seen before, just like any fantasy.
I think that's so perfect. And I think that so much of like so much of intolerance and is the unknown. I think that if you're learning about other communities and other cultures, or you're around them, it's not this like scary unknown thing, and you're realizing that we're all really the same at heart. And I think that really shines through in this book, that she's just a kid with, you know, she has problems that a lot of other kids in other communities have, and is dealing with them in similar ways. So
yeah, I mean, that's so much what I wanted for, like, I wrote something else since then. I mean, we'll see what happens with it, but it was like, I called my agent. I said, I don't know, it doesn't feel like it's doing anything new, and she like talked me off a cliff. She was like, no, it's okay. Sometimes you have stories where the new thing is the setting, and the story itself can be a story. Like, it's okay. It doesn't have to be, you know, something, you know, deep and intensely Jewish or whatever. Like, it's interesting to try to kind of let myself write Jewish stories, because it's so hard to, because I'm so like trained that these are not the stories that are going to make it out there. And I've been just very fortunate.
No, I mean, but that's like the shame that you feel that way, because like I think everybody's stories need to be out there. It's so important, and like you said, for this age group, so important to read all about different people different than you, and reading is really just I think so much more impactful on your worldview than like watching TV, you know, because you're especially in first person narrative like this, where you're really like in the character's head, you know.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Really,
We've just thrown you in.
yeah.
I have to ask though, is there anything that you found like really challenging or difficult to read within the story? Because it must be like a different experience for you too.
Yeah, there were definitely like a couple of the words that I had to like get into my mouth and stumble. The Machanayim. Is that
Machanayim? You got it.
Of Machanayim before, so that I had to like really give myself a few tries at. And the section with all the Aramaic.
Oh yeah, it's funny because like I'm so used to that, because we hear it every week in synagogue, and like it's really like but like I can, you know, just recite it. But it's a lot of really, I couldn't even spell it. I had to like go Google how to spell it, because I didn't even know, like it's just like a thing I can say but not right.
Yeah. I wonder if I can pull up and show you, like, this is like what my it's not going to show it. See, this is what my phonetic, see the phonetic, it's phonetically spelled out, almost code. And for the Aramaic section, it was like these long strings of, I really had to like stop the recording and say it like several times. So that section took me a long time, because I really wanted to like get it right and not, you know. And luckily, another part of the process is once I finish, I send it off to an engineer, and they are mastering it and listening to it, making the sound as good as possible. And they are checking, you know, reading along and making sure that I didn't make any mistakes. And then they'll send me retakes. So it's good I have like another ear, you know, making sure, you know, that I'm pronouncing everything right.
Yes. I'm sorry about that. I really did not think about the audiobook reader when I wrote it.
No, most authors don't think about the audiobook. I mean, that's not why you're writing a book to be read by the eyes, you know. But I really wanted that section to be right. And the nice thing is, when they sent me back the retakes, I was expecting to have retakes in that section, and I didn't. So like, oh, thank goodness. So, and you know, I didn't want, if somebody Orthodox or Jewish was reading it, or listening to it, I didn't want them to be like, that's wrong, you know. So yeah. And like I said, some of the words, you know, I've heard a million times, you know, growing up or from my daughter's preschool, and it was fine. But there were other things that the pronunciation was like a little bit different, and I had to really like check myself, you know.
Yeah, I often actually, like, I'll be listening to, you know, a speech or something, and it'll be from someone maybe, you know, from more modern Orthodox rather than ultra Orthodox. And there's just like there's a ta instead of a sa, and sometimes the intonation will be very slightly different, and it's like a completely different word.
Yeah. There were a few words like that. I definitely, I'm trying to find one, but it's not important.
No, it's just some of them are like, it's even certain things like I say there's one sound. Wait, sorry, what were you saying? Like what?
There are just slight differences in a couple words. Yeah.
No, so I learned how to say a certain sound in Hebrew as O. So I always say it as O. My son in school, they don't teach them O, they teach them Oi. So he says Oi. And then I have a brother-in-law who's a Hasidic, and he says it, I don't even remember, it's like ooh or something. It's like a completely different one. And we'll hear him, he'll like sometimes, do a prayer for us for some reason or another. And it's a little bit of a spectacle because we're all laughing. It's not even nice. But it's between every little tiny sect, there's such a different sound to the point that my son and my daughter are speaking just slightly different versions of the same Hebrew. But it's all just very, I don't know. It's a lot.
It's really interesting. And just, again, it's just all about like bringing us into this world that is often kind of feels like you said, either it's like characterized sort of like not, doesn't feel like real people, or it feels very like a secret world that we're not privy to,
Mm-hmm.
It really feels like you let everybody in, and it's just really, really special.
Yeah, it's funny. I have family members and like friends who told me that they can't let their kids read the book because there are things in the book that the kids aren't ready for, like discussion of a mikvah. And it's like, it's so funny because I was like, no, nothing is taboo in this. I was like, no, I don't care. I'm not writing for a Jewish audience necessarily, so I can write it the way I want to write it, which was really part of, kind of the draw of not writing it for an Orthodox audience. But it's funny, like even certain things in the book that are being demystified for kids who are reading it, a lot of Jewish kids don't know about yet. Like the mikveh is a very secretive thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I don't feel like anything that you write about the mikveh would be like inappropriate. I think it's handled very, very well, where it's, I don't know.
No, I did what I could to like not, say anything that would be like too much. But I think there are a lot of kids who just don't even know it exists. And, my sister was actually talking about this. She's like, remember when our mother, remember when she used to go to those calendar meetings? What do you think she was doing? And another sister was like, oh, she was going to the mikveh. We were like, okay. This is, I never noticed any of this. This all went way over my head. I was probably reading a book.
So people really would like keep it that secret, like from their own children. Like it was that.
There are other certain aspects to it and what happens after the mikveh and so on. And like some of it is just things that you don't necessarily want kids getting into and finding out about and so on, and it's also, it generally happens after a period and, why do they need to know about that? So there is a certain privacy to it generally, and like a little bit of a taboo to discussing it openly with your children, though adults talk about it all they want.
Oh, so I wanted to ask you, like, what were you like as a kid, and what books were you into? Do you think that, like, I mean, I know you said you were into like fantasy and stuff. Does that kind of tied into the magical realism thing that you were talking about? But like, what did you like to read as a child, and what were you like at that age, especially?
I was definitely like very deep. I was already a writer. I was already a reader. I was very just deep into there. I was terrible at machanayim, but very good at dodging the ball. So I would wind up being the last one in very often, and which was always very terrifying for me because that ball was heavy and big. Like I like sports like basketball and soccer and tennis, like sports where they're, you're not hurling a massive ball at someone else. I'm still not good at it, but I was really good at getting away from that ball. So I'd have like the whole team screaming at me, run this way, go that way, get it, pass it. And I'm gone. I was just trying to stay in first.
It sounds very scary to me. It sounds like dodgeball. Is it like a lot like Similar to dodgeball?
It's similar, but it's interesting. It's much more teamwork oriented, because in dodgeball, you're really just trying to get people out. In this game, once kids are out, they're off in the back and they're still working with the team. So no one ends up being left out, which is kind of, I guess, the vibe that they wanted anyway. They don't want people to be, feelings to be hurt or so on whenever it was invented. But it's very violent. Very much so. I think I once sprained a wrist playing. But no, so I was a pretty standard Orthodox Jewish kid. I know I didn't read a lot of contemporary fiction. And like recently I've been kind of thinking that over and trying to figure out what it was that like kept me away from it. And I see it with my son also, where the only contemporary fiction he's read recently is my book. She said, "It's stupid. Why does everyone always like not have a parent in books?" I said, okay, maybe that's fair. But I think I just found it very difficult to relate to contemporary kids doing contemporary things, because it was always so different from my experiences. And he has the same thing. He'd rather read about, dragons mostly, or whatever is going on in Keeper of the Lost Cities, than try to read about, kids going through schools that he doesn't recognize, living lives he doesn't recognize, celebrating holidays he doesn't recognize. And there was a lot of that. So I think we always kind of just stuck with fantasy. I mean, I also liked science fiction. I really just read Animorphs obsessively for my entire childhood. Obsessively. But so there was a little bit of contemporary in there, but it was mostly about, people turning into animals to fight aliens, which was much more my kind of thing. But just a lot of, I read Ella Enchanted, I really liked. I grew up with Harry Potter, like every other millennial. I think the Alana books I really loved. There were just all those fantasy books. I don't know. I was just very consistent like that. Can you tell me about you though? What were you like when you were Aviva's age?
I was a lot like you, like a complete bookworm. Just, that's all. Most of my childhood is, I can kind of just remember, like, how you can be like, oh, I was reading this at this time,
Mm-hmm.
like if I pick up like a book, I can remember sometimes what was happening when I was reading it, Or in the summers, I remember I would just walk around my house with a book like in front of me, walk up the stairs reading a book, walk down the stairs reading a book. So yeah, I read anything and everything. And, just my mom was great because she always just let me read whatever I wanted. She didn't like police it. So there were times when I'd be reading something and I'd think, I don't think this is appropriate for me, learn things that you probably shouldn't. But yeah, and Harry Potter, I'm older than you, so Harry Potter came out, I think I was a counselor at a summer camp, and I saw all these kids reading Harry Potter, and I was like, I have to read this, and then I got sucked in. So I was reading it as like in college, I was reading Harry Potter, but we all were,
It was very much like a phenomenon at the time.
Yeah. But, yeah, I was terrible at dodgeball, so that I would try to get hit so that I could like be out of the game. But then the teacher caught on to me once that I was doing that. She made me go back in, and then she told everybody to throw the ball at me. So that was nice. Good time.
We had a situation like that recently in school, actually, where apparently a whole bunch of girls targeted one girl. And I was like, this is bullying. I don't know. But apparently, I guess sometimes it's encouraged. But
well, that's another thing in this book that I thought rang so true is relationships, friendships between girls, and how volatile they can be and changeable, and how you can be friends with somebody, but something happens and suddenly you're not friends with them, and they're kind of your like nemesis, but then something can bring you back together again. Like that whole dynamic was really relatable.
Yeah, I feel like girls, especially, adolescent girls have relationships like older people maybe have romances. There's just the like, I'm in love with her, I can't stand her, and there's always that tension and that anger. And then, 1 second you're enemies, the next second something happens and you're immediately friends. And like, it is a roller coaster. but it's a lot of fun. Again, would never repeat 6th grade as a child, but I really like them as adults, as an adult. Who knows what they'll be like as adults.
My daughter is almost 7, and it's already happening with her, where she has a friend like that, where they're like almost like in love, but then they're fighting all the time. It's very, very dramatic. Every day when I pick her up from school, I get the whole, history of what happened that day. And first we did this and we fought about this, but then we made up and we did this. And I don't know, I think like as the parent, you just have to be like, well, you'll work it out, because I think kids have to work that out on their own.
Yeah. Although I will say, when I was in 6th grade, I got into a terrible fight with one of my best friends, and we were going to never talk again, probably. And our parents got involved. And like, it had been a month or two. It really went on for a while. And they forced us to be friends again. Somehow it worked. Somehow we're still friends. So I guess I owe them for that. But generally, I wouldn't even tell my parents, because if you mention these things to them, like eventually I feel like you forgive that girl really quickly, but they hold on to the grudge. They're not going to forget what that kid said to you that one time, So there was a lot of that. I don't know. But with Aviva, I wanted her to have there's that girl in the story, there's Shira, who they have a much more volatile relationship where they don't really like each other. They're both kind of friends with the same person. But at the same time, there's some sort of grudging acceptance there. And I think there are a lot of friendships like that, where you have the girl who you really do click with. And then you have the girls who you're just kind of stuck with, but it's okay sometimes, you don't have to hate each other.
Right. Well, it's like when you become an adult, you're not going to like everybody you work with, but you're stuck with them. So you just have to, that's all part of learning how to deal with people.
Right.
It's like a
very much
of adult life in a way, it's like practice for being an adult.
Yeah. Only 10 times the drama.
Yeah. That's
right.
true.
But
more hormones, probably.
A lot more. Oh, what a tough year. I don't know. But with Aviva, at least, I felt like it was important for her to have this kind of life outside of her house in the mikveh and the Dybbuk, just because I felt like she was kind of the only conduit that her whole family has to the outside. And she's not, afraid of going out there, but at the same time, it's just very debilitating to her to, kind of exist in that without her mother. So there's kind of that weird balance of, figuring out friendships and figuring out family.
Yeah, that's another thing that's very relatable. A lot of people, I think, have their school friends in their school world, and then they have their family friends and friends outside of school. And it does often feel like 2 different worlds that you're in the middle of. And more so for Aviva, because she's dealing with her mother, and she's in that situation where she almost has to be the adult because her mother is kind of incapacitated. So
yeah, I think it was something that was really important to me to kind of talk about her with compassion, her mother, because her mother is just going through something awful. And of course, her mother must feel as though she's not sufficient and so on. I think she even says it in the book at one point. And it's really I find sometimes I empathize more with a mother than the daughter, because she's just I get what it's like to be a mother and just sometimes feel like you just can't do enough and you're not going to, and it's just, you're not humanly capable of it. And for me, I wanted Aviva to kind of have that sort of relationship where she feels super protective over her mother, while at the same time, eventually sort of coming to terms with the fact that despite that protectiveness and despite how defensive she might feel about it, it's wearing away at her. It's really hard on her also. And kind of let them both sort of step out and come to each other.
Yeah, they both have to realize that the other one is suffering in a very specific way, and that they have to both kind of meet in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you really do. I think you spend most of the book in Aviva's head, and then you do kind of come to the realization at the same time she does that her mother is where her mother is with everything. Hi, Laura.
Hi. Hello. Sorry about that. Okay. So it is about 7:45, and I wanted to get started on these questions, but also I wanted to announce the winner. And the winner is Eve Davis.
Oh.
So, is that someone you know, Mari?
I do. She was at my house this past weekend, and I told her about this, and I'm so glad she joined.
Oh. Well, congratulations, Eve. You will be getting 3 months of a membership to Libro.fm, which means you also get 3 audiobook credits, if I'm right. And again, you should use those credits for a certain book, I think. I won't tell you what to do, but yeah, you can, I guess, email me at events@astoriabookshop.com, and I can send you your prize link, or I might be able to hunt down your email, but we will figure it out. And with that, let's get on to the questions. So the first question we have is from Donna Chatsanov, and it just says your upbringing, which I'm assuming is maybe a question about your upbringing. Is there anything else you wanted to add about that?
No, I was very fortunate. I mean, I grew up with both parents, and in a very strong community. My parents were not raised Orthodox Jewish. My mother was really like more traditional, so there was kind of like modern Orthodox, I guess. And my father really was not raised with any religion. He wound up, he went to school. He went to like a Hebrew day school, and he met, the people who kind of brought him to that. And I think because of that, we always kind of had that, like, we weren't really like shut off from the world, but at the same time, like, we had a very healthy understanding of pop culture and so on. And like, they were very permissive in terms of that. But at the same time, we came from this like very strong, Orthodox community where my parents had both chosen it, and they knew why they chose it, and they kind of gave that on to us. And I think that's, part of why I feel just so strongly about my community. I have my criticisms, but at the same time, like, I'm so happy to be part of it. I'm just so, I really, really love it because of that, because of them. So I've got that.
Oh, I love that. All right, let's see. Aviva stayed with me after I read the book. Will there be a follow-up to the book? And that is from Joan Meschenberg.
So will there be a follow-up? Right now, I don't anticipate one. I think that, the story itself is very well contained as it is. I remember when I first wrote it, like afterwards, my mother was like, oh, and you could make a whole series of like Aviva stories. And I was like, I could, but I think this is her story. Like, I think it's here. I think it's complete. I mean, if I find another story for her, then there would be one. But right now, I'd really just love to talk about other girls and, other stories, and kind of figure out, my focus is always going to be, these little girls, because I love them. But we'll experiment with another one next. We'll see if you love her too.
No, I'm sure we will. All right. And we have 2 questions from Tova Rosenfeld. The first one is, can you speak a little bit about what inspired you to write about a mikveh in particular? Side note, I Googled what that was while we were.
So there are actually 3 different versions. So I don't know if you even Googled the right one. This is a women's mikveh. There's also one where you just kind of dump your pots and pans in briefly and then pull them out. But you can also just do that like.
The result I got was about menstruation, so I'm assuming
that was one.
Yeah.
Wait, I forgot the question now. Wait, let me find it.
What inspired you to write about that?
I think that there was just sort of a feeling of, this is kind of a mystical, interesting like place, and it's a very secretive place, especially to middle graders, where it's they're kind of, they don't know much about it, and it's like this kind of liminal space that exists within their world, but that they can never go into. And it was really cool to me to kind of contemplate this, this girl who grows up within it, and maybe bringing her friends in and so on, and a secret, mystery behind the mikveh and all of that. I think it just felt like the perfect place for that. If you're writing, a Jewish ghost story, you want it to take place in somewhere mysterious, and nothing's more mysterious than the mikveh.
By the way, I just added the little button Yeah, it's green. It says get your copy. You should.
Please.
All right, let's see. What is the next question? Thank you for pointing. And the second question from Tova is, how do your own children or students influence your writing? I know you talked a little bit about some of your character, or Aviva in general, being based on the characteristics of that age. But do you want to talk a little more about that?
Trying to think if there's really anything else. In general, I'm saying my children influence my writing because they keep me from doing it a lot. So that's a really strong influence they have.
The question did not say it had to be a good influence.
Oh, yes. Let me hear from Leah. That's so interesting because you do like really cool stuff. I'm just like typing on a bed usually.
Yeah. Oh. Hey, that is cool. But Leah should tell us something.
But if my daughter influences my work, I mean, I think that when I'm reading a book, like a middle grade, like a book for kids, I definitely think about like her maybe listen to it someday. And I will say sometimes, you know, a lot of times I'll record at night because it's the quietest, and, you know, my studio is soundproof, but it's kind of right under the roof. So if it's during the day, there's like lawnmowers and stuff. So I'll record at night, and sometimes it's when it's bedtime and she's like reading in her room, she wants to come and sit on the bed in the guest room, and she likes to listen to me through the door. And I didn't even realize, like the first time she did that, I didn't realize she could actually hear me until I came out, and she was like, "What happens next?" So that was really it was really cute, and I was really glad that most of the books I get are very PG. So there's a book I did where I had to say, no, you can't sit there for this one. Yeah, I read to her a lot also. So when I read to her, I can't help but like do voices and stuff. And, you know, we're reading Harry Potter right now, so I have to do like the accents and stuff. I can't help myself.
I do a really subpar version of that when we read Harry Potter also, but I don't think it's going to be like yours. Yours is the professional one. Has she ever seen you like on Broadway or anything like that?
No, because the last Broadway show I did was before she was born. Oh. And then since she was born, I've done a lot of concerts and shorter things. But I mean, when the pandemic started, she wasn't even 5. And you know, we didn't think she could really sit through a whole show. So, you know, I'm hoping that the next thing I do, she can come. She definitely wants to. She says to me, like, "Mom, when are you gonna like do theater again?" Like, it's sweet.
Oh, that's great. Is she also like theatrically inclined, do you think?
She's extremely imaginative and dramatic and expressive, but so far she doesn't really want to do it for other people. She's doing it for herself. And that's because I would like her to be a doctor.
Yeah. As a theatrically inclined person, that is probably a good idea. Also, I didn't know this. Antonio said, you know, Arthur A. Levine? I say Levine when I read the publisher name. Who's Mari's editor, was the editor of Harry Potter.
Yeah, I did not connect that until now, but I knew that because I've seen his name on. That's really, really cool.
Yeah,
that's crazy. Wow.
I had like a minor breakdown when this all started, and I was like, okay, let me Google him, and then I was like, oh wow.
That's a full circle moment right there. We have another question from Joan that I really love because I'm always curious about how students feel about their teachers and their lives outside of the classroom. Do your students know you're an author?
So one class, there's a girl in the class whose father is friends with my father. And I am like sitting there the day after the book came out, you know, living my life. I think I was teaching. She raises her hand and I call on her. She picks up the book and says, "My father says you should autograph this." I found out later it was a dare. But so that class, I think I like said something like, "This is not the time." And no one has had the nerve to mention it since. But that's the only class where I think they know, and they seem just kind of puzzled by the whole thing. I have one class where they're convinced I'm on social media somewhere, and they're constantly telling me, they're like, we Googled you and we couldn't find anything. We Googled you and we found something, but it wasn't you. They told me at one point they Googled, my students will never find me, and they found someone, but it wasn't me. So I'm using a pseudonym because of this. It's not even like that great a pseudonym, saying it's just like a shortening of my first and last name. And yet I told them, I said, you're not Googling the right name. And that has them completely baffled. So I'm just having fun with them at this point. At least there's something interesting I'm hiding. Because, at least it's not just like that I secretly have a Tumblr where I post, I don't know, pretty floral pictures or something really boring. So now I have some like nice secret life going on.
I will die if anyone ever finds my Tumblr from high school.
Very much so.
But yeah, Leah, does your daughter understand the concept of the fact that you're like a person that is like in things that are widely consumed?
I don't think she really does yet. I mean, she sort of grasps it a little bit. I did, when she was little, I did do a week where I was kind of an extra on a Sesame Street Christmas movie. And when we showed it to her, she was like, like it didn't quite connect. But now, like when she sees like pictures of me like on the set with like the Muppets and everything, she's more like, oh wow, like, and she like we'll be watching something and I'll say like, oh, I know that person because we did a show together. And so her thing now is that she's like, Mom, you know famous people. Like, so it's not really about me. It's not about who I know.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not. But the funniest thing was out of the blue one night. Kids just say weird stuff that comes in their head. She said, if I break my ankle someday, I really hope that some of the famous people will sign my cast. Like completely out of the blue. And I was like, what? Like, so.
Okay, we have time for one more question because I really love this question and I am very curious. Tova once again asked, what has been the reaction from the Orthodox community to Mari's book?
It's actually really funny because I don't think they're aware it exists. Like, it's not a novelty. I was like I have one sister who's like very like, she's deep in like the Orthodox community. I mean, I am too, but she is like very far away from anything that's not Orthodox Judaism. And she's like, so what's the big deal? Everyone publishes books, because they tend to publish them through like Orthodox publishers where you're essentially self-publishing, and like there's some sort of distribution. You often have to pay for the book to even be published, things like that. And she's like, there's no big deal to this. This isn't a big deal. I'm not reading it. I'm not being part of this. And I'm like, okay, but this is like, you have to be outside of the Orthodox Jewish world to understand like that books like this don't often come out. But I know I gave one to someone I work with, and the first thing, and she didn't know about it or anything. I like wrote her a nice note inside, and the first thing she texted me is, how did you get this published by a mainstream publisher? Because people who are like people who are involved in this know it's not common. But in the Orthodox Jewish community, I don't think they're fully aware this book exists or like the significance of it. But, I hope there are, some people out there who will like find it at their local library and be like, whoa, I think my mother marched down to like the local bookstore and was like, you need to carry this book. We'll see if they actually do. But my mother is, very strong. She's, in competition with Antonio for top publicity. but I really
mean, you'll have to like plant ads in like any Orthodox publications. Just be like, just write to editors of different. I'm assuming there are like Orthodox Jewish publications, newspapers, magazines.
Can I tell you something really funny? So just remembered. So there's a publication in my neighborhood called the Five Towns Jewish Times, and they are mostly ads, but they have a couple of articles. It's stuff, whatever. And it's like a free publication you pick up that's outside the supermarket. So the book was blurbed in the New York Times. And I told my son, I was so excited. I told my 10-year-old, I said, the book was blurbed in the New York Times. He said, okay, who cares? I was like, okay, fine. And then like 2 hours later, I was going through, you know, looking at the ads in the newspaper as I do. And he says, oh, where's the blurb? I said, no, the Five Towns Jewish Times and the New York Times are not in the same league. No idea.
How dare you? And with that, we are out of time, but this was really lovely. Thank you both for hanging out with the bookshop virtually, and thank you everyone for showing up. We are always so happy to have authors representing their own stories, and we hope to see Mari in the future with her next release. Do not forget to buy a copy of the book. It is illegal not to. I can't say that. Sorry, I'm pretty sure I'm not allowed to say that. But whatever gets people to buy the book. Yeah, I hope everyone has a lovely night, and thank you so much for stopping by. You can always find us at astoriabookshop.com, and we are at Astoria Bookshop on every social media channel. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you so much, Leah. This was so cool.
All right.